I was looking at TikTok today, and it still grabs my attention. Although I forget about it for long periods of time. I don't. It's not. Once you're on it, it's totally addictive. But if you don't think about going on it, then it isn't, right? Or am I just missing something?
I've never looked at TikTok in my life.
Never looked at TikTok. Okay, yeah. It's just a series of videos. And depending on kind of how you've been pigeonholed and by their algorithm. Right now, I'm getting a whole lot of eat the rich videos. There's sort of a lot of an element in my novels called inventions seems to have taken root in American society, which is disturbing.
Well, maybe it's also in reaction to sort of national news has
totally
elevated that, has probably pushed the parameters on that particular database entry a little higher.
Yeah. There are people saying billionaires don't deserve empathy. Interesting.
Well, it's been that way for a long time.
Yeah.
I mean, the funny, history is a blast. It really is.
Right.
Like, go back to the progressive era and what they were saying then.
What were they saying then?
Well, they had anarchists walking around with bombs blowing people up.
That's true.
I mean, it was the era that gave us the Sherman Antitrust Act. It was the era that finally gave us the Internal Revenue Code and the Internal Revenue Service, because the issue of the age, of the Gilded Age, was that they were gilded and they had a lot of money.
Right.
And
the law didn't apply.
Law didn't apply, and they could break strikes, and they could send in the goon squad and things like that.
Right.
I should really read up a lot more about. I want to read. There's two things I want to read. I want to read a really good book about Jackson, Andrew Jackson, and his whole time. The classic book of that is called The Age of Jackson, written by, I think, Arthur Schlesinger, but it was written in the 1960s, and a lot of people poo-poo it now and say, he's really missing out on a lot of things. I don't know. But I want to read about Jackson. I really do want to revisit the progressive era, because there's a lot of parallels.
Was it a reaction to Teapot Dome, or was that after? That was Harding?
No, Teapot Dome was Grant, I think.
Grant.
No. I'm wrong. No.
The year was 1920. Woodrow Wilson was not well. There's a song about it. It's this great song that I've talked about before.
1920 is really late.
Yeah,
I'm talking about.
This is before. You're talking about.
I'm talking about Teddy Roosevelt. I'm talking about the Sherman Antitrust Act, which I think is either 1900 or 1901. And the Internal Revenue Code gets established in the wake of World War I. So that might have been 1920 or a little earlier. But, you do have, it's the everlasting issue, which is, the relationship between the rich and the poor. Or as Ernest Hemingway, I think F. Scott Fitzgerald said to Ernest Hemingway, the rich are different from us. And Hemingway said, I know. They've got more money than we do.
But are they fundamentally different, or can we even know? I mean, that was an interesting question. At first I was like, okay, you're making excuse. You can't feel, what is it? That you don't need to feel empathy for billionaires. Interesting point, right? That's sort of like saying you don't need to feel empathy for, let's just say, Irish people or Italians, because they're not like us. So it seems like a fundamentally prejudiced thing to say, and something that predates treating a group of people very badly. Now, that's great in the abstract. The set of all sets of people who are being targeted is a set, or the set of all people who are being targeted is a set. But is it the same? Is it the same when you're? One thing about empathy is, as opposed to compassion, empathy is feeling someone else's feeling as if it was your own. Right? It's Bill Clinton saying, I feel your pain.
I can put myself in your shoes.
I can walk a mile in your shoes. Grew up in Arkansas. I know what it's like to be poor. I feel your pain. We don't know what it's like to be billionaires. Only billionaires know what it's like to be billionaires. We know that they're human beings and they go through some fundamental things, but a lot of things that they go through, we don't, right? So it may not be possible on some levels to genuinely feel empathy unless you have really done a lot of research into the life, like what it's like to, I don't know, live in international waters for a year, or spend this century dead for tax purposes.
Well, but the fundamental error here is, if this is what you've been hearing recently, then really the statement is kind of silly. The whole issue is that they have it coming, and that's what they're really saying. Because and they don't deserve our pity or anything like that. And I think that's a real dangerous state. I mean, I think there's a lot of problems inherent in that. If there's a systematic problem, but just criminals don't deserve our pity.
Yes. Yes.
Oh,
yeah.
They don't.
Yeah.
Okay.
Who's a criminal? Who
right.
And
who's making the judgment?
How far are any of us from being a criminal if the legal system determines that we might be? Even this guy who was arrested, I mean, seems like a lot of evidence, but he's still innocent until he's proven guilty.
Yes.
Right. So, I agree with that. And it's just that we're suddenly here. Right. And I had been writing about this as if it was in the future, and we're suddenly here, and it's only one incidence, but it's the incidence compounded with all of these videos that people are putting out. Like they're not like us. They don't deserve our pity. Nobody needs there to be any billionaires. I kind of agree with that. I think 100 millionaire is plenty. And it gets damaging above that level, but it gets damaging to society in general. It's just like you end up walking around with giant shoes and you can't help but smash a bunch of things, once you have a certain amount of clout. Society should decide, if it can and will, what the limits are.
Yeah, but I mean, the whole point is he wasn't shot because he's a billionaire.
No, there was more to it than that.
Yeah, he was the CEO of a specific company, and
he actually had a pretty bad history in terms of
but
boosting
whether he
profits
has
by
$1 billion
claims
or not is irrelevant. Maybe he took a salary of $7.50 an hour with that, and let's say he still got shot. Does he deserve our empathy then?
Yeah, well, I think there's two different things going on. The CEO got shot, and that seems to be motivated by healthcare claims. There's writing by the shooter, and and there's arguments about how cruel the system is, and that's one thing.
Right. So the fact that he was a billionaire to me is absolutely irrelevant.
So not the start of the vengeance then, which would be good, because I think once that gets started, it doesn't know where to end.
Like many things.
Yeah. It's like great. It's like Robespierre, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Wait, we're farmers? Really? Are we going to chop the heads off farmers? I mean, I'm not saying that that's what happened, but it's hard. It's really hard. Like, it took Napoleon to stop it.
Well, the problem is like you said, okay, I think multimillionaires, that's plenty enough. Well,
right.
That's a nice opinion.
Yeah. Well, the vengeance then lowers it. Like, okay, we're going to do the Fortune 500 and then the Fortune 1000. And then we're just going to look and see who's got a fancy house.
Yeah, sure.
And then
big
people with big noses,
Right.
Yeah.
So, again, the problem is people just play very fast and loose with words. The fact that he was a billionaire is meaningless. not meaningless, but it's not the issue.
I don't think it is totally meaningless. I think that there's like a combination, and I think it is symbolic to some people of the what they call eat the rich campaign, right? It's the the what is it? The peasants are revolting. Aren't we? Aren't we revolting? And boy, there's a lot of that feeling out there. It seems
there's a lot of people writing about it.
Yeah,
this is me
and
putting on my Elizabeth
things
Eisenstein hat, which is it seems like a lot because there's a lot of printed words about it. Who knows what people feel, or how many people actually really care that much? Honestly, either way. But people do get. I'll tell you one thing: people get very emotional about healthcare.
Yeah, well, as well they should. Yeah, we pay the most and get the worst. So that sucks.
And you can die.
Now, also, just because I had like these videos scrolling all day while I was working and just listening to people talk, there was one very intelligent comment about the difficulty of switching to a Medicare for all situation, and that it's absolutely like it is not as easy as Bernie Sanders says it should be. This is somebody who works in the healthcare system. First of all, you're talking about killing off a lot of jobs, and you're also killing off a lot of the research that goes into making new drugs. If you basically remove the entire insurance and drug company, echelon from our economy. So the only way to get to a more fair system is with these little incremental changes, a small improvement, a small improvement, a small improvement. We're going to take a huge step backwards from that, but that would be the only way to get there. So, and people don't like that. People hate that, especially Americans. Americans are like, I want all my streaming channels and every movie that's ever been made, and I want it right now. I don't want to wait for good healthcare. But at least this one person was like, it just seemed to convince me. Yeah, this would not, to get to a good situation, like the NHS or something, even comparable, it would take a lot of little steps or otherwise we overturn the apple cart and we end up with something worse.
Yeah, I wouldn't know. I couldn't judge that. But it is a fascinating, something I think about all the time, because that's what people say, that, well, we charge so much money for these drugs because it goes into research and development.
Yeah. But it doesn't really, does it? Yeah.
Oh, who knows? I don't know. I don't know.
It goes into stock buybacks and no, it goes towards the bottom line. But if you eliminate the drug companies, if that's just nationalized, the profit motive also is a major mechanism behind research, because there's a profit motive involved, because people are really eager to make more money. And how do you make more money if you're a drug company? You make a new drug.
You make
that's going to do an amazing thing. Yeah.
It's a lot like a record company. You spend a lot of money on a lot of failed efforts, and then every now and then you discover this one drug. It's amazing. Like what's the erectile dysfunction drug?
Cialis. Or
what was the one before it? What was the famous one?
I don't know. I don't use one.
The little blue pill or something like that. Yeah, that was for like strokes.
Yes.
They were trying to find a drug to, I think, handle like a vaso.
What's going on with Harry? Harry, what's going on, man? I don't know. Dude,
I don't know, man.
It's been like this for hours. Hey.
But that's what Ozempic, a mistake.
Yeah.
Diabetes. And all this stuff. And so they're hoping for a blockbuster. So in many ways, it's a lot like the record company. And as such, it's incredibly opaque and very infuriating. And it's sort of like I think about this all the time, like the bell system. You and I are old enough to remember when, you had to plug a lot of quarters into the payphone if you wanted to call somebody just one state away. Now we can have a video conference with somebody in Antarctica for zero money. Yeah. Back then, you could spend $5 a minute calling somebody in another part of the world. It was a screw job. But at the same time, they created things like the laser, the transistor,
Bell Labs. Yeah.
Bell Labs. And so the question is that a good payback? And the answer is, who knows?
It depends on how you measure things, right? Of course, we only measure things one way. You know, did it make a killing?
Well, the laser, beyond dollars and cents, I mean, the laser is an amazing invention and the transistor is an amazing invention. The question is, were they worth us getting raped,
getting hosed
for about 50 years every time we placed a phone call?
Yeah, there wasn't it wasn't really 25 cents worth of, I don't know. What, 25 cents worth of electricity
I think that's the true answer, is that you don't know. And the problem
we don't know.
is you have these things where you say, okay, we do it this way, we could do it that way.
Yeah, drop
we
a
could
dime.
obliterate Bell Labs, which means all your phone costs go down by a factor of 100.
Of course.
But you don't expect a transistor from us anytime soon. That's what the drug companies are going to say. You want to do this, you go ahead and do that, but forget about cancer vaccines, and forget about this, and forget about that, because it ain't going to freaking happen. And
I'm not 100% sure I buy this. I'm not sure.
Neither do I.
This.
And we're not going to solve it tonight.
I know. It's just funny
it's a
because
very interesting thing.
It's just Google Chrome wants to define devices on my local network all of a sudden.
You had to talk about that eat the rich thing.
Yeah.
Now they're pissed. They're pissed at you, Jim.
Don't allow? Am I still, can you still hear me?
Yeah.
I didn't allow, but maybe don't allow means allow. So, this is interesting though, because Bell Labs, so the original network that was set up before there were hackers, that was our phone network, was exactly what allowed China to hack our modern phone network by using backdoors to get in, using some, I don't even know where they got in, but it was some area where it was like, if you get the password right, you get infinite tries on this password, and if you get the password right once, you're in forever.
Yeah.
And so it was basically a password hack.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it was that they just took over somebody's email address, after somebody died, or they reset a password,
or they brute force it. Who knows? There's a lot of old gear. I mean, that's why everybody's so up. The huge effort in the past decade has been SCADA, which is I think SCADA is the industrial control stuff, like the software that controls like refineries and water plants.
Yep.
The industrial control systems, because those people are not paying. They weren't paying any attention to security, and it was like, password is PASSW0RD.
Yeah,
and no two-factor
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah, no multi-factor authentication.
Right.
So
if you're the phone company, should you be using your cell phone for multi-factor authentication? I'm just asking. If you're Verizon, shouldn't you? You should probably have a different method for multi-factor.
It's fast. This is what I did for a living for a while, and it's just fascinating about how resistant people are to this. And it's like, your system is just wildly insecure, and you need to do this, and needs to happen today. Okay, well, we'll put it on the list. And I'm like, okay. I said, but you've got a big red X painted right on your back right this very moment. Just FYI. In my case, it was, you're going to fail the audit. You're going to get, you're going to fail the audit. It's going to be very embarrassing for you. Okay, we'll get to it, but it's really just a registry change, and it's not really an important vulnerability. I'm like, yeah, tell that to the auditor and see how they buy that. I'll tell you, it's not going to go well for you. I'm just telling you right now. I don't really care. I don't get laid any more or less often, depending upon whether you pass this audit or not. So you can take my words or not. But people are incredibly resistant, and there's a lot of businesses that just don't have money. I mean, if you're talking about old telephone, like local telephone operations, those are not funded at all. I mean, you can still get a copper landline from your local phone company, but that's not exactly where people are investing a lot of money is in local telcos. So they're running gear until it falls apart, and they're not going to upgrade it. They don't care.
No, they're not. But that's an interesting thing about our new world is someday Verizon will be just like Ma Bell, and will be in charge of outdated equipment and outdated networks with security that doesn't keep up. Mm-hmm. And if we want our country to be secure, we need to dismantle it, right? All of these older networks, they should have either been upgraded or dismantled for national security. And there isn't any way to do it just by the market. The market says, save money, don't do it. Mm-hmm. And that puts everybody at risk.
Well, thank God for the Chinese, because they're basically just unpaid pen testers. They're the ultimate red team. And they're just going to keep embarrassing the telephone. But yeah, I mean, it'd be nice if we could do that without like putting people's lives at stake, which is what's happening when the Chinese break into these things. I mean, what they're really, a key thing that foreign nations are looking for is information about their nationals. Mm-hmm. When the Chinese hacked into the database of the Office of Management and Budget, I think they hacked the OMB. It's basically they hacked the HR department for the federal government. What they were really looking for was which Chinese nationals were on the payroll of the CIA and the NSA. Yeah. That's and other federal agencies. And a lot of people died. Yeah. So it's really serious stuff. It's a really serious game. But yeah, there's what are you going to do?
People, no, it's true. I mean, yeah, if you want to find the phone number of somebody who might be spying on you, if you're not the Chinese government, you might go through a lot of links, a lot of small tasks to get there. For them, it's like, let's just hack the entire phone system and find the number. Yeah.
Yep.
So that's fun. Tell me about the entertainment, science fiction or otherwise, books you're reading, shows you're watching, movies you've seen, if any.
Well, I had an interesting follow-up story to that one about the phone system.
Okay.
So the breakup of the Bell system is really fascinating. But the one I really loved, so back before the breakup, all the money was in long distance. The phone companies, the Bell system, there's only one company, made all of its money off of long distance.
Yeah, I mean, people were. I remember, like, you'd set a timer.
Yes,
and that thing would go off at 10 minutes, and you'd hang up. Unless you made of money.
They loved it, and so one of there's one group that was pretty much okay with the breakup of the Bell system, which was the Bell system. Because the way they structured the modified final judgment in 1984, 1982 was we, AT&T at that time, we retain all the long distance operations. And what we're going to do is we're going to spin off the baby Bells, which was Bell Atlantic, the New York New England Exchange, which was 9X, and Midwest and Meritech and all that stuff. They get the local loop because that's shit. Nobody wants the local loop. We'll spin it off.
Quarters and dimes. Quarters and dimes.
Nickels and dimes, and give it to the local baby Bells. We're going to hold on to long distance. Boy, was that a stupid decision. The writing was already on the wall if they cared to look. And one of the most fascinating things that was happening in the world at that time were the callback systems. So if you're the government of Suriname, okay, what you do, you own your phone system. You own what's called the PTT, the Post Telephone Telegraph. In most countries around the world, it's called the PTT. And you own the phone company of your nation. Let's say you're Suriname. Let's say you're Honduras. Okay. And what you can do is you can charge the tariffs for inbound and outbound calls. And what these companies did universally is they charge nothing for people calling outbound from their. So if you're sitting in Suriname and you place an outbound call, that'll cost virtually nothing, or only as much as AT&T charges to carry that call. But if you're in New York City calling into Suriname, you'll pay like $7 a minute. And this was a major revenue source for governments. So what clever young boys and girls did is they went and they bought phone switches and brought them to Suriname and set them up. So what you would do is you'd call from New York to the special phone number in Suriname. And when you got connected to that, you would type in the number of the switch would know the number of the person you're trying to call, and it would know your number, and it would hang up. The switch would hang up, then get the person in Suriname and conference you in. So the person in Suriname calls you back, and they're called the callback systems. Mm-hmm. So if you wanted to call Suriname, you'd call the switch, you'd call the switch, and then, you'd call the switch, and then you type in the number of the person in Suriname you're trying to reach, and the switch would hang up and then do the outbound call. So you didn't have to pay anything.
It wouldn't be connected. Your call would not have been connected.
It would. Well, you'd maybe pay 25 cents for like 5 seconds, for the 5 seconds of the initial connection. But that's it. And then the person would call you back. And what was happening eventually is that governments were sending in troops with machine guns to shoot these phone switches, because overnight, these callback phone switches were wiping out millions of dollars of revenue for these countries. But it was clear what the lesson was, which is that, people are actively thinking. And then after that was the whole stealing people's calling cards. That was like a whole industry in Manhattan.
Was a huge thing.
People stood in, people would stand at Penn Station in New York next to the payphones, and they'd have like binoculars, and they would just watch you typing. I mean, I once made a calling card call in Penn Station, and within 15 seconds, like somebody had racked up like $170 charge on my calling card.
Wow.
And so it was clear at that point what was going on. And what was funny is that after the breakup, we all know what happened, which is that AT&T, this thing called the internet came along.
Yeah.
And now everybody's really excited in getting an upgraded landline connection. Like, hey, you shitty little telco that AT&T doesn't care anything about. I'll pay you anything if you can bring me an ISDN line. I'll pay you anything if you bring a DSL line to my house. I'll pay you anything.
Right.
And AT&T goes into a tailspin, because long distance now is meaningless once people figured out how to do this, like what we're doing right now. I mean, what we're doing right now would have cost thousands of dollars an hour.
Well, it was the kind of thing that NPR was paying all the time. They would have remote guests. I mean, I guess before that they had to shuttle tape around from the different affiliates. But yeah, sometimes you would dial in from on an ISDN line. Or a T1 line, if they really were fancy.
Yeah, but that was massively expensive.
Yeah.
Massively expensive.
You'd have to be a giant company, basically, to do what we're doing. And it wouldn't have been nearly as good.
Right. So I just think it's it's fascinating how everybody's so certain about what the future holds. And then like overnight it evaporates. Well, the internet did that to a lot of industries. I find that fascinating. I'm always fascinated by eat the rich. I'm always not that I'm fascinated with the concept of eating the rich, but I'm fascinated. It comes back. I really do have to write this down. The whole thing about Jeff Bezos' yacht, which is what is useful, what's valuable, who gets money, and what does it matter?
Well, there's data, because this is an interesting thing. And I know we keep going back to it, but maybe it's just one of the things we keep going back to, because I think it changes as more data is collected, as we get more points on this. Maybe the problem isn't his yacht, frankly, right? Because it could be any large boat being built or commissioned,
right,
for any purpose. The yacht is a large boat that people work and
they work to build it, and they work to maintain it. It's a lot of jobs.
But if it's
jobs great,
but if it's Royal Caribbean Princess that's commissioning the boat, or if it's Jeff Bezos for his personal use,
who cares?
It doesn't matter. What does matter, though, is, both of them are carbon hogs, right? Both of them are polluting once they're made. They're not sailboats. And the problem is the carbon footprint of billionaires is on par with like small cities. Mm-hmm. They really do manage to spew a ton of crap into the air, and basically, use up nature. that the rest of
That's
us
not
could be using.
necessarily, but it's not necessarily so. You could be a billionaire and live a very modest lifestyle.
Yes, but on average, billionaires tend to spew a ton more carbon. They don't fly commercial, right? They fly private, for one. They own things like these giant yachts for their own personal pleasure, and the yachts actually continue to spew carbon even when they're not using them. So let's say they, $1 billion is a ton of money. It's more money than you can ever spend. So the multiple houses, upkeep on multiple houses, flying around private, multiple boats in the ocean. These have a huge footprint. Now, I think the question really is that cool with everybody? I mean, they're not,
well, then rate people on their carbon footprint, not whether they have $1 billion or not.
well, I think what's sort of like the wheel that's sort of turning is, hey, maybe being a billionaire isn't that cool.
Okay.
Whereas before, it was lifestyles of the rich and famous, right?
Sure.
It was wonderful. I mean, we wanted to know more. We wanted to be them. We wanted to be around them. We wanted to, and there's still a lot of that. People still want to be around people like Elon Musk. But, lately, a lot more people than before are saying, well, these are just antisocial individuals.
They're just people. And just because they have $1 billion doesn't mean I like them any more or less than I like everybody else I meet, which is most people I don't like. I mean, I'm indifferent, or I'm glad they're doing their thing over there, but don't get them too close to me. But
but if I'm to be honest, I like them less. I like them less than most people.
Right, because they have more power now, and so you're a little more concerned. You're a little more like, if you don't like somebody and they're 4 blocks away from you and they have a modest lifestyle, that's different from somebody you don't like who's got like $1 billion. Like, okay, see, that's the thing, is that a person with $1 billion has a lot more to say about how the future will turn out. Yeah, and that's really the thing, and that's the issue, is that they've been elected by the consumers, or they've been elected by or they've been elected by Lady Luck.
I mean, some of them are straight up thieves, right? So they've been elected by ruthlessness, by their own ability to steal a nation's wealth and pocket it. Not all of them are American, right? So
agreed. Yeah. And so that's the problem, is that I didn't vote for these guys. Yeah. And we already have enough problems with the guys that we vote for. Yeah. And then this whole thing is, I don't want to vote for these guys. And the interesting thing is, let's say you do something like, okay, look, total net worth is capped at this. It's capped at this number. Well, the issue at that point is going to be, who's going to receive all that wealth? Like, where is that wealth going to go to that used to be in the bank accounts or in the investment portfolios of billionaires? And I think a lot of their wealth is probably not even in money. It's probably in like ownership of businesses and stuff like that.
It's stock options, and there are a lot of things in the way of this. I mean, look, if it's a company you're talking about, so the owner of a company, I mean, if Jeff Bezos were still 100% in charge of Amazon, then if he was capped at $900 million in terms of what he could earn before the tax rate above that goes to 100%, then
who gets it?
Who gets it?
Who gets it?
Would he choose to pay the workers more? But the company is obviously doing really well. The workers aren't doing any better.
Right. And so that's a big question. That's a question I ask myself all the time, which is, you're going to give the money to the feds? That's not going to happen in today's climate.
This is not going to, I mean, in today's climate, this is not going to happen. But,
right.
But I mean, another thing would be, if everything above that is taxed at 100%, then everything above that goes to
the feds,
the federal government. Yeah. And then it depends on what do you want to do with that. So will that go into better education, or will it just go to making more bombs? I mean, that's where, if we have a democracy, that's where the democracy thing
or does it just get absorbed?
Well,
into the, yeah, you know, it's really weird.
But the absorption usually goes into, it usually disappears into Pentagon spending. I mean, yeah, that's certainly a possibility.
Or Social Security or
But
something
why
like
is
that.
it better? Why is it better? I mean, nobody
Because
earns.
technically they're elected. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not saying I'm a big fan of it, but I'm just saying you can make an argument that at least, you know, these are the elected representatives of the people, and so therefore they, you know, but still you're making an argument that's fundamentally antithetical to one of the core principles of the society, which is the primacy of private property. If you make it, you keep it. Ta-da!
Yeah, but that's almost never been the case. I mean, no. Even if you buy a house,
Yeah,
you know that you buy a house and you have to pay property tax.
Mm-hmm.
You have to pay insurance. The house is constantly costing you money. There's nothing that you actually buy that just sits there and is wonderful.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
so you're talking
a
about
bar
just
of
raising
gold
the
is
tax
as close
rate.
as you can get. You know,
Right. And so and so in some sense, yeah, I don't know. We chase each other around the table all day about this thing. But the whole point is that, you know, the decision that a particular person, as a wealthy individual, makes about how their money is going to be allocated is probably going to be different from how an elected official is going to allocate it. So you have to ask yourself right off the bat, is one decision inherently better than the other?
well, it comes down to do we want to allow people to be wealthy enough to buy off entire governments? Right, because
Right.
that's part of the problem is the corruption. You know, the elected officials should be working for their constituents,
Mm-hmm.
but they're not because there's so much money out there, and they want some. Now, $900 million is still a lot. You could bribe a bit. You could do some bribing with that, but is that really where you're going to put your money if you can't actually get? I think there's just a race to be a trillionaire right now, right? And I think like people like Elon Musk is like, well, I've done the math and I can't become a trillionaire. There's the sirens again. Sorry, I can't become a trillionaire if you know, law and order continues to prevail in this country, and I can't steal directly from the till or, you know, take all of Fort Knox and convert it into Bitcoin. Then I'll never make it to a trillionaire. So I guess I'm going to, you know, end the United States and suck up the money. And then I get to be a trillionaire.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't think there's much more thinking to it than that. I think it's just like, there's an attainable goal. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do whatever it takes to get there. And
Right.
it's just dangerous, right? You're talking about people that really could be doing, frankly, I think better things than buying yachts with that money. And they're not doing it because maybe they're looking at the other guy who's, you know, a little bit richer or coming up underneath and they just want to win.
Mm-hmm.
But they do a lot of damage on the way.
Yeah. Well, that's one that's one argument, which is, you know, there is inherently there are better goals than others. I've been reading a book that I wanted to read for a long time, which was 1491.
Yeah.
Which was from the man who wrote 1493. Do you sense a pattern here?
Right.
1493 is a fabulous, really fascinating book. I'm sure we've talked about it before on the show. But 1493 really opened my eyes. Like it really spoke to something. I'm like, what happened in 1493? I mean, we hear that, you know, Columbus discovered America in 1492, and then all of a sudden it's like Jamestown. I'm like, wait, 150 years just went by. What was happening during like the 1500s in America? And what 1493 was a lot. And it had profound repercussions all over the world.
Interesting.
Massive repercussions. And he spends a lot of time on China. And how the fact that so what happened during the Columbian Exchange, one of the most important parts of the Columbian Exchange was that all these amazing plants were exported to the rest of the world. The potato,
Right.
is a big one. But another one that's even a plant that's even more nutritious and grows in even worse environment is the sweet potato.
Right.
And the sweet potato made its way to China. And according to this author, and I think he's stretching it a bit, but according to this author, it like turned Chinese society upside down. Because now you had this crop that you could grow in like the worst possible land. And so you had these people who were growing these crops on this really bad, very slopey, very hilly land. And they chopped down all the trees, and the rains came along and washed everything into the river. And you had this massive flooding. And there are these huge popular rebellions around, blah, blah, blah. But it's fascinating because, you know, I know I'm repeating myself, but we learn in school, you know, the triangle trade of the Atlantic. Right. You know, slaves, cotton, rum, and that whole thing. And that's been, but there's another thing going on between the Philippines, China, and Monterey. Like the Spanish had this huge triangle trade going on, between Mexico and China. But they weren't going to China. The big transshipment point was Manila in the Philippines. And the Chinese would send these huge ships to Manila, and the big thing was porcelain and jade. It's an amazing story. You should read it because this guy he talks about this one guy, and the thing you could rent space on one of these ships and fill it with as much stuff as you possibly could. And they're like the size of telephone booths. And this guy sat on top of his crate like during the entire trip. Because if you succeeded, and it took all the money you had to rent like, you know, 2 cubic feet or 4 cubic feet on these trading ships.
Yeah.
But if you made it and you sold your stuff, you were made for life. If you got there intact with anyway, it's a fabulous book. I really, really like 1493. 1493. I've read that a long time ago. I highly recommend it to everybody. And the thing I love most about the book is it really picks up near the end. He says Mexico City was the first international city.
Interesting.
If you went to Mexico City in 1580, there would be Asians walking the street right next to Africans, next to Europeans, next to Native Americans. It was the first city that everybody came from all over the world to go to Mexico City because that's where the money was.
Wow.
And he said Mexico was the first international. It's just really cool. It's really interesting thinking about that. And he also has the other great line, which is that America wasn't settled by Europeans. It was settled by Africans. He said, if you look at the numbers, he says America was settled by Africa. So it's great. He does a good job. So 1491 is sort of the mirror image of that, where he talks about what it basically is a roundup of all the current scholarship, or I think he wrote the book in 2004, so it's probably not even that current, I don't know, 2014. So maybe it's not as current anymore. But all the scholarship about the Native American civilizations.
I started reading it, and it does start with an airplane flight over is it Peru?
No, I think they were in the Yucatan. They were flying over the Maya.
And you start to sense this pattern of these hills, and you realize that they're not naturally occurring. They were man-made. They're the remnants of cities of some kind, or farms.
I think it's the
Mayan
Mayans.
farms, yeah.
And the big turning point was the use of LIDAR. Because a lot of because the jungle is so dense there and so rapidly growing. And they had an idea. People have had an idea for decades. There's a lot of crap in this forest, but we don't have enough machetes and enough time to cut
Plus,
everything
that's not
back.
a good idea. Plus,
and then they took LIDAR and they said, no, you're wrong. There's like 10 times as much crap as you think there is. There's like giant temples everywhere.
Right.
And I think that's when people really took a step back and said, whoa. And then they started doing...
How big was this civilization really?
Really big.
Yeah.
Like really, and the Peruvian, the Inca and the predecessors to the Inca, all those Peruvian civilizations, that's one of the most mind-blowing chapters in 1491, because he goes into great depth.
I got to finish it. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. But he goes into great depth about how from the coast, so Peru, You have the Pacific Ocean, and then you have between 50 to 100 miles, and then you hit the Andes, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Okay. And so, and then it goes up really sharply. Like the terrain really starts climbing really sharply.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is that entire coastline, for the most part, is absolute desert. Nothing grows there because of the prevailing wind patterns and the fact it's in a double range shadow, blah, 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 blah. But most of the coast of Peru is just sand and nothing else. The exceptions are these river valleys of all these rivers coming off of the Andes Mountains and emptying into the Pacific.
Right.
The more interesting thing is that as you start to hit the foothills of the Andes, it gets better and things start growing. But the problem is you've only got a couple of miles before it goes up, and now you're at a different biome. And then you got another couple of miles, and then you go up and you're at a different biome. So what was happening was that the trade that was happening was vertical, not horizontal. The fishermen on the coast were trading sardines to the people in the middle who were growing mainly cotton, because they needed cotton to make the nets to catch the sardines.
Whoa.
So they grow cotton at some point, and then people would trade the cotton up to get stuff from higher up, and way up high it's cold and chilly, so they would grow certain types of plants up there and trade them. It's wild.
Wow.
It's wild. And they didn't have the horse, and they didn't have the pig, and they didn't have the goat or the sheep or the bull or the plow or the wheel or ironworking. But they did miracles with the plants they had, namely maize, which they did amazing things with, built an entire culture on. I mean, considering the fact that they got dealt a really shitty hand in terms of some natural resources,
right?
They did amazing things with it. So it's an interesting book to read, and it confirms, that disease counts for a lot. That, they're talking about 95% die-off rates. Yeah. From the initial encounter.
I had written a short story about, a fictionalized story about a die-off rate of 90% like that. Just trying to picture, for a survivor, what that would be like. And I don't know. I don't even think I did it justice, but so much gets lost. If 9 out of 10 people are gone, how do you maintain any sense of history, your culture, all the songs, all the stories, all the technology?
And then the Spaniards burned the books that are left. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
You couldn't leave well enough alone. You had to go burn the codices of the Mayans and the Aztecs.
Unbelievable, yeah. I mean, really, you would have kind of outlines of things left, and a sense of how to honor your ancestors. But so much should be lost. So much
inconceivable.
Should be lost. Yeah,
inconceivable. And he talks about how when adventurers, the early the guys who came immediately after Columbus, basically said, wow, there's a lot of Indians here. And then like 50 years later, it's like, where'd they all go?
Right.
Because now they're finding abandoned villages and stuff like that. So he talks about that. He talks about the disease, and it's broken into 3 sections, which is how many Indians were there?
Can I just stop for a second? Because think about this. Who's going to survive? It'll most likely be the young or teenager kids.
Sure.
Right. And 2 out of every 20, right? And and because they walk away from the others and they don't catch it, or they have some natural resistance, what do they walk away with? Like, they are an entire society. What's left of an entire society is whatever's in their head. Mm-hmm. And that's then what builds back into the Native American population.
Right.
I mean, it's so beyond anything we
but they don't have
even
books.
Talk about.
They don't have books, and they don't have computers, so you can't even rely.
You know
on
what?
That.
We probably don't even know what they didn't. I mean, this is what 1491 is about, but like, what didn't they have? We don't know.
We do know. We do. Yes, you're absolutely right, but we do know that there's no horses. Like it's very clear that
true.
the Americas were pretty much clear of all megavertebrates.
Right, the
bigger
giant
than a
sloth.
llama.
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, I mean, and that's the other thing. That's what I don't like about the book is there's a lot of extrapolation. Oh, they had rigidly structured societies. I'm like, how do you know that?
How do you know?
Because there's this picture there's this stone here where the guy's wearing a headdress. I'm like, okay, guys, this is starting to feel like that Monty Python thing where they find the thumb, in the archaeological dig. And the voiceover says, from this one small piece, we can reconstruct the entire creature. And they show like a woolly mammoth with a big thumb sticking out of the middle of its face. And I'm like, guys, but just sticking to the hard evidence.
Yeah.
It's pretty, I mean, all you have to do is just look at Machu Picchu. You just have to look at the skill that they had in putting that together, how they moved enormous blocks of stone and fitted them together. I mean, it's a lot of coordination. It's a lot of skill. It's a lot of motivation. You've got people working in concert with a lot of skills. That's civilization. That's sort of like why you do civilization, is that you can have these specialized skills. And so so the first book is, how many of them were there? Part number 2 is how long ago did they get here? Because it used to be, it's 15,000 years ago they came across. Now they keep pushing it back. Now it's back to like 30,000. So now they're at the point where maybe the first cities were in America and not in Eurasia. Maybe Sumer was not the first city. Maybe the first city was in America. That'd be a cool one.
Wow.
That'd be a shocker. But yeah, I think it's like back to like 30,000 now. And they're still not really sure how they got over here. It's, did they come by a boat or, what? But nobody really knows. And then the third one, which is really interesting, is how the Indians changed America. That many things that you think are a wild landscape were actually terraformed by the Indians. Like they actually planted trees and burnt undergrowth and planted pear trees and pecan trees because they're basically doing crops.
Of course.
And that what you think is this untouched wilderness is basically
Nothing
what's
like.
left over.
Nothing like. No.
What it would look like if the Indians hadn't been here, like burning the undergrowth for a couple of thousand years and sort of manicuring the entire place.
Yeah, it was described as the Puritans were walking in what should have been perceived as manicured English gardens.
Yes.
Yes. That instead they saw a wilderness with animals, wild animals behind every tree. No.
And in fact, there are some travelers who say, this land looks like an English garden. Yeah. It's really weird. Like this terrain that we're walking through looks like somebody like put this together intentionally. And the answer is, yeah, you're right. It was, but they're all gone. Yeah. Good book.
Yeah.
I think
I'll read both of them now. That sounds really great. Actually, sounds like a great read.
Yeah. So that's that.
I haven't
watched anything. What are you doing?
You know what? Remember last episode or the episode before? I said that I was watching Dune Prophecy.
Yes.
And that it was disappointing. Oh, I was watching it after the Folk Alliance conference in the hotel room because I was really tired and stayed up all night. I've continued to watch it, and I have to say I like it. Now I like it. Now it could still disappoint me, and you might watch it and think it's terrible, but I think the first two episodes are not great. I think, meaning they're good-ish, but the promise of what they're actually doing comes out later.
Okay, what's it on?
It's on Max. You don't have Max?
Okay. I have nothing.
Oh, good for you.
I have like Amazon Prime Video and Netflix, like the gut bucket offerings of our streaming universe. Okay.
If you look it up. It's what's great about Frank Herbert's universe is that it's just so old. There's like before Guild and after Guild. And Guild, like the founding of the Guild takes place in 19,000 AD or something like. It's really like massively in the future, and this is all taking place around before the founding of the guild or around the founding of the guild, and it gets into the politics of House Carino, the early House Carino, the Richese family, the Atreides and the Harkonnen families, and the formation of the Landsraad. The formation doesn't happen then, but
Right.
this is all happening after Serena Butler's rebellion, where they defeat the thinking machines after 1,000 years of war, right?
Mm-hmm.
So big issues, right? Big drama. And this is happening maybe just a few generations after Serena Butler. So, and one of the main characters is a Harkonnen. That's where it starts to get good, is that you start to see the origins of the Harkonnen family, and what it will become and why, at least in this proposed setting. It borrows a lot from Herbert Son's books, which I didn't mind. I thought they were all right. I mean, his style of writing wasn't like his dad's, but the storytelling was good.
Honestly, I couldn't tell the difference.
Oh, you really?
Like two sequels after Dune, I was just like, "Oy, is this ever going to end?"
Right. Yeah, no, it gets really tiring. Once we get
God,
to God Emperor of Dune.
Like, yeah. Please.
He's a worm. He's a man. He's both. He's a god. Yeah, right. Leto too. And then it just gets more and more abstract. Actually, I think the work that his son did, is it Brian Herbert? Was more grueling, right? I mean, he had to recreate all the prehistory to that moment, to the first two books. First two books are fine, I think, that Herbert wrote. But yeah, I mean, what was the Butlerian Jihad? What's the history of House Carino? What's the history of House Harkonnen? What's the history
is it based
of
on anything that his dad said, or is he just making this up out of whole cloth?
I don't know what his method was. But it doesn't contradict anything. It's very faithful. Far more faithful than Amazon Prime's, prequel to The Lord of the Rings. Oh, I really wanted to like it. I was doing so much work to make that okay, and it was not. It's
not happening.
No, it was not okay because there's too much temptation to draw in characters that we already know. Oh, Tom Bombadil.
Yeah. I'm amazed that even got done. I mean, was Christopher Tolkien like imprisoned or something? Yeah.
No, is Christopher Tolkien still with us?
I don't know.
I think it's his estate. His surviving relatives were the ones who were like, sure.
Yeah.
Go to town.
I want to know who gives a shit about Bob.
Han Solo? Great.
I get a new house out of this one.
Put Han Solo in there. That'll be great.
Feel like Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Everybody, Elvis.
Misa no Kinda Wizard. Misa no need a staff. Oh my God. Yeah. Right.
So, 1491, 1493. You've been reading watching Dune Prophecy.
Watching Dune Prophecy. I have stalled out on the Steerswoman books. There's only one left, but I'm kind of grinding to a halt.
You waved the white flag.
Yes.
I'm still thinking about City in the City. I think that's a profound book. I really do. I think it's really profound how he pulled that off. Because it's a metaphor for how we do our everyday life.
Yeah.
There's things we're taught not to see.
Yeah, we don't. In cities. And, in suburbs, too. What was it that I was talking to Catherine about, people are freaked out about drug use here and addiction, people suffering from addiction in our neighborhood, right down the street from us. I mean, we live near what I will call Sackler Alley, and I think they should all be called Sackler Alley. It's called Mass and Cass here, and that just gives a bad name to the Massachusetts Avenue and Melnea Cass boulevards. But it is some of our neighbors feel like something should be done about homeless people who are suffering from addiction. And Catherine grew up in the suburbs outside of Chicago. She said, yeah, there's drug use in the suburbs, but it's invisible. And it's actually more disturbing because you kind of don't know where it is or what's happening, but it's out there. And, you'd think this sort of city in the city really only applies to big places where lots of people live in close proximity, but I think it also applies to these other spaces, these other non-city spaces where you see what you choose to see.
Yeah. Really good book.
Yeah.
I keep thinking back on that one. It's a little long, it's a little tedious, but the idea is fabulous. It really is a fabulous idea. And the way he does it with no fanfare. Like there's no ta-da, no flourish, no drama at all. It's just, this is another day.
A very little explanation.
Like, what the hell is he talking about? Yeah. What's going on here?
Right.
It's great.
Right.
Love that book.
So good.
So what else? What's coming up? What are we doing next?
I've been remiss. I've been very busy at work, and I haven't been able to do any video editing, and I haven't been able to line up any guests.
Good.
So it's just you and me until I catch a break, and then I'll get some people to come on. I should really call Neil. He would like to come on. Neil Eckstein.
Okay. Bring him back.
Bring him. Maybe have him come in. He has an album out. He's been producing concerts for years and years and doing photography for years and years, and he decided he was going to make an album. So give it a listen.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all I got.
That's all I got.
Well, till we got something else. This is Zero. Funny Not Funny is produced by Jim Infantino at Slab Media in Boston. Lionel Casson is the co-host. Our website is funnynotfunny.bigego.com. The background music you're listening to is the song Hum from Utopia Revisited by Jim Infantino. The opinions presented by the co-hosts are ridiculous and should not be taken seriously by anyone. Our intended audience is literally nobody. If you're listening to this podcast, you should stop immediately and seek help. Please do not subscribe or leave a rating or review. It only encourages us to make more. Thanks for listening.